So, the Spurs just lost to the Warriors without Steph Curry. Obviously, this series would have looked a lot different if Kawhi was there, and it seems like the details of what's going on with Kawhi are inconsistent. Regardless, we won't get into that. Instead, we're going to take a look at what the Spurs can do moving forward after a rather underwhelming season by their standards. How's it going, ladies and gents? My name's Andy, and today I'm going to break down the future of the San Antonio Spurs with a couple of different scenarios that could realistically happen. Now, the first scenario is pretty simple. Let's say Kawhi returns to full health next season, plays just as well as before, there's no drama between him and Coach Pop, and everything goes smoothly. The Spurs get back on their feet, win about 60 games, and are competing for a title. But as much as I love Kawhi and the Spurs, this team is not built to contend for a championship if they kept the same roster. You could point to the 2017 playoffs before Kawhi went down with the injury and they had a 20-point lead at halftime and say that they could have legitimately won the series. But it was just one half and you can't really take much from that. The game changes all the time and the whole team was just shooting lights out for 2 quarters. And in this scenario, we're looking at the 2018-19 season, and if the team is still the same as right now, it's gonna be difficult to win. I mean, they were already really old a few years ago, but Parker would be almost 37 years old by the time next year's playoffs begin. Pau Gasol would be 38, and although he's still a good rim protector, he can't keep up with anybody after a switch. Ginobili would be like 41, and I'm not even sure if he's coming back next season. Then we have guys like Rudy Gay and Danny Green who are on the wrong side of 30 as well, and they both have player options for next year. Parker would also be a free agent, but he's most likely coming back to the Spurs. So if we assume those 3 guys are all coming back, the Spurs would have literally no cap space at all. Even if Parker does not return, the Spurs payroll would still be about $99 million for next season. They wouldn't have enough space to sign anybody significant in free agency anyway. So they might as well just go over the cap and re-sign Parker using his bird rights. I also didn't consider Kyle Anderson, who's had a great season, but he's a restricted free agent and I doubt the Spurs would go deep into the luxury tax to re-sign him. And then you have Bryn Forbes and Davis Bertans, who had breakout seasons too, but they're also free agents. For the sake of this scenario, let's assume the Spurs go deep into the luxury tax to keep all of those guys, which is unlikely to happen, but we'll go with it. Basically, to sum everything up in this first scenario, the entire team stays intact and everything stays the same. But it's still not looking too good. Even if Kawhi comes back playing just as well as before, many other core players would get worse because of age. On top of that, the team can't get anybody in free agency unless they do a sign and trade. In my opinion, their ceiling is the Western Conference Finals, and I honestly don't think they can compete with the Warriors or the Rockets. So in scenario 1, nobody improves that much, and the Spurs lose in the conference finals or semifinals in 2019. Okay, so now for scenario 2. The entire roster stays the same again, except this time, the Spurs' younger players, including Kawhi, make massive improvements in their game. Despite being out for nearly the entire year, let's just assume Kawhi improves and gets even better next season. Kyle Anderson, Bryn Forbes, DeJounte Murray, Davis Bertans, heck, I'll even throw Brandon Paul in there. Let's say they all make massive improvements and are now getting the bulk of the minutes. This is basically the best case scenario of what could happen if the Spurs kept their roster intact. The younger guys improve a lot, while the older vets are still there to mentor them. The Spurs exceed everyone's expectations and become legit contenders again. But this scenario is unreasonable. What's more likely to happen is that the Spurs would fall somewhere in between scenario 1 and 2. Their young guys improve a little bit, but it's still not enough to push them over the top. Alright, so now for scenario 3, which is my favorite. One of either Danny Green or Rudy Gay do not opt in to their player option. So let's say Rudy doesn't opt in and he leaves the Spurs. Joffrey Laverne also does not take his player option and he also leaves. That takes about $10.5 million off the books, giving the Spurs a payroll of about $89 million. The salary cap next season is projected to be about $108 million. You know what this means. They now have $19 million in cap space to sign some free agents. So let's look at the 2018 free agents. I doubt Durant or LeBron are gonna sign for $19 million, although it's possible to open up more cap space if they do a sign and trade and somehow get rid of Pau Gasol's contract. But honestly, I can't see that happening, so we'll rule them out. Then you've got Paul George, who's an interesting case, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if he went to the Spurs, but I'm trying to keep this as realistic as possible. I don't think CP3 wants to come either after that incredible Rockets season. DeMarcus Cousins doesn't seem to fit well with the Spurs culture. The Rockets are definitely re-signing Clint Capella, so he's out of the question. DeAndre Jordan? Maybe. Aaron Gordon said he wanted a max contract of about $25 million a year, but I don't think he's worth that much. Julius Randle is a very interesting prospect, but after the Lakers traded away Larry Nance, I think they're gonna re-sign Randle. Jabari Parker is quite interesting. I think the Bucks kinda ruined his value, and he'd be a lot better in a different environment with better coaching. Isaiah Thomas? Nah. Now here's the guy who I think would be really good in San Antonio. Tyreke Evans just had a great bounce back season with Memphis, and now he's an unrestricted free agent. A lot of other teams won't have much cap space next year, so I think the Spurs can snag him if they play their cards right. He's what the team needs, an extra playmaker who can create his own shot and improve his three-point shooting a lot. The dream scenario would be to sign Tyreke Evans to about 13 or 14 million a year, that sounds reasonable, and then try to snag an energetic big man like Kyle O'Quinn, with the remaining 6 million in the cap. Then afterwards, they can go into the luxury tax to re-sign Parker and Anderson because they have their bird rights. So, to sum it up, Scenario 3 would see the Spurs field a starting lineup of DeJounte Murray, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Kyle O'Quinn. On the bench, they'll have Tyreke Evans, Pau Gasol, Tony Parker, Kyle Anderson, Patty Mills, maybe Manu Ginobili, and some others. They could interchange the lineup too, maybe even put in Tyreke as a starter. I think this team looks really good on paper, and is also realistic. Although they do lose Davis Bertans and Bryn Forbes because they don't have their bird rights. It's better than if they just keep the same roster. And that pretty much sums up the video. I wanted to put another scenario for, if the Spurs want to trade Kawhi, but there's just way too many possibilities for that. I don't think they're going to trade him, and I think these are the 3 most realistic scenarios that could happen. At the same time, they might just blow up the entire roster, trade away the bad contracts for picks, but it's the Spurs and they don't do that. Anyway, let me know what you think the Spurs should do moving forward. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.